What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're having a look at the absolutely insane game featuring Gukesh D, the new world champion. This game is Gukesh versus Vladimir Fedoseev from round number 2 of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. All right, here we go. In the game, Vladimir opens 1d4 and Gukesh goes knight f6. Then we have c4 and e6. So far, very standard stuff. Now white plays either knight c3, g3, or knight f3 in this position at the highest level. And here Vladimir goes knight f3. That is arguably the main line here. Now Gukesh, he plays solid d5, heading for the queen's gambit decline opening. And of course, this is the most solid and most popular way to play against 1d4 at the highest level. Now here, the two main moves for white, of course, are knight to c3 and the move g3. In the game, Vladimir did go knight to c3, and we have that famous 3 knights variation of the QGD on the board. Now here, black has a million different options in this position. The main lines for black tend to be bishop b4, bishop b7, c5, and c6. However, there are some other options black can play, and in this game, Gukesh mixes things up, and he actually goes for the Vienna variation with the move d takes c4. Now the Vienna here, not to be confused with the Vienna after 1e4, e5, then knight to c3, followed by f4. That is also the Vienna in the open game. So here, the Vienna is defined by black going d takes c4 in this 3 knights variation of the QGD. Now here, black is threatening to hang on to that extra pawn. White typically goes e4, as he did in the game, trying to win it back right away. And now here, black is going to have 2 main options. One is bishop b4 in the spirit of the Rogozin variation. That is the old main line of the Vienna, but most black players don't play that line, as there is a very tricky pawn sacrifice. Real fast, I want to show you it. Here, black goes bishop b4. White does not have to go bishop g5. That is the old move. The new move is bishop takes e4, allowing knight takes e4, and of course that knight on c3 would be pinned to the king on e1. That would be a pawn sacrifice line, and overall white gets very dangerous attacking chances in that line. So instead here, a lot of black players, including Hikaru Nakamura, Jan Nepomniachtchi, and many other players, instead of bishop b4, here they are now going for the move b5, and this move leads to absolutely insane complications. What is the idea behind this move? Well, first of all, it's very simple. Here, black is threatening to just hang on to that extra pawn on c4 if white doesn't do anything. Of course, the move b5 does literally hang the b5 pawn. Therefore, white usually goes immediately knight takes b5 or e5 and then knight takes b5. In the game, e5 was chosen. That is the main line here, driving back that knight on f6. Here, Gukesh goes knight d5, centralizing his knight. And now, of course, white does capture that pawn on b5. Knight takes b5 played in the game. And now, without that pawn on b5 defending c4, c4 is now hanging. Therefore, knight to b6 is virtually forced from black. And this is the real starting point of this line with b5 in the Vienna variation of the QGD. Now, of course, with that knight on b6, the pawn on c4 is defended, and that means both sides have even material. Black is down 1 pawn, that being the pawn on b5 that he lost. Of course, he also won the pawn on c4 of white, so both sides are missing 1 pawn. Black has a slightly weakened pawn structure on the queen side. Those pawns on c7 and c4 are pretty weak. However, the pawn on c4 is very difficult for white to win, and that means black is going to be able to maintain material equality for a very long time. Now here, white has several different ways to continue. The main thing he has to figure out is, does he want to play solid, for example, bishop b2, short castles, and so on, or does he want to go for a very aggressive attack on the king side with, for example, bishop b3, queen d2, h4, h5, rook h3, g3, and so on, attacking the black king? Well, let's find out. Here, white has a variety of moves. In the game, though, he does go knight to c3, and this is a very typical move for white in the structure. The knight on b5 was a little bit misplaced. It did its job on b5, and now it does drop back to the c3 square. However, I do want to point out there are a million other options here for white. Queen d2 to f4 is one interesting option. Beyond that, bishop b2, bishop b3, queen c2, a3, and so on are all playable for the first player. Instead, knight c3 chosen in the game, and now here, Gukesh, he goes knight c6, developing his knight, a very solid move. Now, once again, white's gonna have a million options. Of course, there is pressure on that pawn on d4. Both the knight and the queen are attacking it. Therefore, bishop b3 from Vladimir does make a lot of sense in this position. Now, it's time to talk strategy for Gukesh, the world champion. What does he want to do in this position? Well, one of the big questions for Gukesh is, do you want to castle queenside, for example, bishop b7, queen d7, long castles, or do you want to castle kingside, say bishop b7, short castles, or do you want to go option number 3 and leave your king in the center of the board for a while and play it by ear and see what Vladimir does? Well, in the game, he sort of goes for option number 3. He starts bishop b7, developing the bishop on this long diagonal where it can theoretically be very, very active as soon as that knight on c6 does move. And on b7, the bishop does do a very good job of guarding all of these weakened light squares on the queen side. So solid move by Gukesh. Now here, Vladimir, again, he's got literally a million different options here. For example, bishop b2 is fine, a3 is fine, rook c1 is fine, queen d2, queen c2, even rook b1 are playable. In the game though, bishop e2 chosen, and this is perhaps the most solid move, intending perhaps a short castle. Now here, Gukesh, again, he's got a lot of options. The main lines here for black include queen d7, bishop b7, and bishop b4. However, here, Gukesh really shows he is playing for a win in this game. He's going all out as black with the black pieces. He actually plays the move knight to e7 here. Now, I have never seen this knight maneuver in this variation of the Vienna with an early b5 from black. What is the idea of knight to e7? Well, number 1, you are opening up the attack of that light squared bishop on this diagonal. That is very, very important. However, beyond that, you're also threatening ideas like knight to e5 and on f5, and on f5, that knight would be putting a lot of pressure on that bishop on e3. For example, knight takes e3, then f takes is one possibility, at which point white does lose those 2 b's. He's down to 1 b instead of 2, and that bishop pair advantage for black would be very, very significant. All right, here, white, how does he want to deal with these threats? Well, the 2 main moves here for white are short castles and actually b3, trying to break up the queen side, and beyond that, of course, the alpha 0 attack with the move h4 is also very playable. Now, in the game, b3 was chosen, and this move is designed to break up the queen side and open up some lines of attack for white. White knows that black is going knight f5 in the very near future, therefore he is starting his counterattacking chances on the queen side immediately. All right, now we have c takes b3, then queen takes b3, the queen flying out, and very importantly, the queen has that the x-ray attack on the bishop on b7. If that knight moves, it is pinned, then you lose the bishop on b7. All right, here, Gukesh, he is not phased. He just continues with his plan. He goes knight to f5, again, putting pressure on that bishop on e3. Of course, that wasn't forced. There were some other ideas. For example, rook b8, defending the bishop preemptively and setting up the discovered attack on the queen on b3 is one possibility. And beyond that, queen d7 or even knight e d5 instead of f5 was also playable. But in the game, a knight f5 chosen by the new world champion Gukesh. All right, now here, Vladimir Fedoseev, how does he want to continue? Well, he finds the strongest move in this position immediately. Now, first of all, how do you deal with this threat of knight takes e3? Very importantly, if you move the bishop, let's say you go bishop f4 or d2, then black just wins the pawn on d4. Therefore, that bishop simply has to stay there. And if you short castle, then again, black just takes on e3, and he's got a relatively okay game. Instead of those options in the game, Vladimir, demonstrating his sagacity, he plays the move bishop b5, immediately hitting the king on e8 with the bishop on the b5 square. What is the idea behind this? Well, you're inserting the check, and it turns out there is not an easy way for black to deal with it. Of course, if you block with the bishop, you lose the bishop. If you block with the queen, you lose the queen. If you go king e7, the bomb cloud style move, I mean, you're not literally Magnus Carlsen, Gukesh, so you can't play that. With that in mind, what else can you do? Well, technically you can go knight d7, but that runs into the immediate bishop takes d7, queen takes, and then queen takes b7. Again, we're seeing the idea of queen b3 played earlier in the game, setting up the x-ray attack on that bishop. Therefore, black here has literally one move to stay in the game, and that is the move c6. Now, this move is the correct move, but the problem with this is it simply cuts off the bishop on b7, the bishop no longer slicing down the board. All right, the bishop on b5 is under attack. Here, Vladimir does go bishop d3, retreating the bishop and putting some pressure on that knight on f5. Now, is this the time for Gukesh to simply trade on e3? Well, it turns out, no, it is not. Before doing that, he actually goes bishop to e7, and this move really puzzled me. I mean, you are giving white the additional option of bishop takes f5 in this position, giving up the bishop for the knight, but damaging black's pawn structure on the king side. Now, I actually expected that from Vladimir. I thought it'd be a decent idea, but instead, Vladimir, he sticks to his guns. He's a very principled guy. He just goes short castles, getting his king to safety, and once again allowing Gukesh to trade on e3 if he wants it. And it turns out, in this position, yes, he does want it. He just goes knight takes e3, giving up the knight for that bishop on the e3 square. Now we have f takes e3, and then finally short castles for Gukesh. All right, now the pawn structure in the center has transformed. You almost never see this exact pawn structure from white, in addition to, you know, the weak isolated pawns on c6 and a7 from black. So what is the idea here? Well, these pawns on the dark squares control the dark squares very, very well, and the pawn on d4 is actually very well supported by that pawn on e3. That means overall, these pawns are actually not that weak. They control a lot of good squares, and with these light squares open, white can go, for example, knight e4 and then knight d6 or c5, maybe set up attacks on the king side, for example, bishop c2 or b1, queen c2, queen takes h7, and so on. There are a lot of different ideas for white with this pawn structure. So overall, I do like white's chances here, and Gukesh, he's gonna have to play very precisely to defend. All right, now Vladimir, how does he want to continue? In the game, he goes knight d4, jumping up with his knight. That is the strongest move, and now this knight is guarding just a lot of very important dark squares in the Gukesh camp. All right, Gukesh, how does he want to deal with this? Well, he finds the strongest move, and he finally does something about this threat of the queen on the bishop on b7. He goes rook to b8, defending the bishop and potentially setting up some sort of x-ray attack on the queen. I mean, imagine if the bishop and the knight were to move suddenly, then good, bada boom, bada bang, the rook would be attacking the queen on b3. All right, now here, Vladimir, he continues, knight to c5, jumping up with the knight, pressuring that weak bishop on b7. Excellent move by Vladimir. And here, Gukesh, it turns out, he simply has to keep both of those bishops alive, and the best way to do that is just to go bishop c8, retreating the bishop. However, in the game, Gukesh, he didn't calculate that. Instead, he went for the move bishop takes c5. Gukesh, I hear quite a few players saying Gukesh is a very deep calculating player. His intuition isn't as strong, but guys like Magnus always say this guy is a very deep calculator. He calculates almost everything out in advance, and I assume he thought this was the right way forward, but it turns out giving up this bishop is not the right way forward. That bishop pair was just too important. Now white takes back with the pawn. Obviously, d takes c5, hits the knight on b6. The knight's going to move in the game. Knight d5 chosen. That is the right square for the knight. You don't want to go knight d7. That would be significantly weaker for Gukesh. So instead, knight d5 chosen in the game, and then we have a wide variety of moves available here for white. For example, Vladimir can go queen to a3, pressuring a7, defending c5. You can go queen c4, centralizing the queen. You can go rook fb1, piling up pressure on the b file, and so on. There are a lot of different ideas in the game, though. Queen to a3 chosen, sliding the queen over again, defending c5, and pressuring the weak pawn on the a7 square. All right, now here, Gukesh plays a very strong move, a5, defending that pawn. The queen now attacks it still, but it is defended by the queen on d8. The only problem with this move is the queen on d8 must stay on this diagonal to maintain the defense of the pawn on the a5 square. All right, now here, Vladimir, his next step in his plan is going to be developing those rooks on f1 and a1. Currently, both rooks are not doing a whole lot for the white position. Therefore, he may want to bring them over to, say, the B files, the C files, or the D files. In the game, rook A D1 chosen by Vladimir. Now, this move is a little bit committal. I would have expected, say, rook F D1. With the move rook A D1, he is saying he wants his other rook to stay on F1, where it is pressuring F7, and this may mean Vladimir is intending to attack on the king side, maybe with ideas like, I don't know, queen to a4, queen e4, threatening queen takes h7, maybe trying to find a way to get knight g5 in at some point, and so on. So, very interesting. I do like some good attacking chess myself, so let's see what Vladimir can do against the world champion. All right, now, Gukesh, how is he going to respond? Well, as usual, he has a wide variety of responses. For example, queen d7 and c7 are playable. Beyond that, you can go h6, a waiting move, or even bishop c8, yet another waiting move. The problem for Gukesh here in this position, obviously, for the most part, is that weak bishop on the b7 square. If he could, I don't know, trade that for a knight or something similar, then he would be doing okay. However, right now, that bishop is just permanently locked in by that pawn on c6. Later in the game, he may want to go bishop a6, for example, queen c8, bishop a6, or rook a8, then bishop a6. But for right now, that bishop is very, very weak. All right, in the game, Gukesh does go queen to c7, developing his queen off the back rank and still maintaining the defense of the pawn on a5, but also pressuring e5. So very good multi-purpose move by that queen. All right, now here, Vladimir, bishop c4 is the move, potentially pressuring d5 and opening up the d file for the rook on d1, a solid move. And again, Gukesh, he's got to find the right way forward. What is it going to be? Well, in the game, Gukesh plays a very flashy move, in my opinion at least. He goes for the move knight to b4. Now, what is the idea behind knight b4? It's very, very simple. First of all, you are defending c5. Now the queen no longer targets that pawn, but beyond that, you're setting up the idea of bishop to a6 as the knight now controls that a6 square. Therefore, if white goes bishop takes, the knight recaptures, and then number one, you get rid of that very bad piece on b7, that being the light squared bishop. But beyond that, the knight on a6 would also defend c5. So, very good play by Gukesh. He is playing really, really solid from this relatively difficult to defend position. All right, now Vladimir, he is not done. He goes rook d6, a very solid move, centralizing the rook on the d file, setting up rook fd1 ideas. Vladimir showing why he's a 2700 plus GM. But Gukesh here, he's not done. Bishop a6, the whole point of his plan with knight b4, getting his bishop to a better square where it does pressure the white one on c4. Now we have bishop takes, then knight takes, then rook to c1, sliding over the rook, and now here, Gukesh, how will he respond? Well, again, you are in a defensive position. You do have to find some way to defend for now. For example, rook b7, queen b7, h6, and so on are all playable, but in the game, Gukesh being a very active player, he does go knight to b4, jumping down with the knight, trying to stay active in this game. All right, now Vladimir Fedoseev, how does he want to continue? There are also a wide variety of ideas here for white. For example, knight d4, pressuring c6 is one idea. Instead, in the game, h3 chosen. Now, the idea behind h3, I assume, is sort of a waiting move. He doesn't really know what to do yet. He plays h3, gives his king a little bit more loft on the h2 square, so decent move overall. But now Gukesh is going to start fighting back. He goes queen to a7, sliding his queen over, pressuring c5, defending a5. Very good move overall. And now Vladimir, again, I thought knight d4 would make a lot of sense, but instead he goes for a slightly more aggressive move. That is the move e4. Now, the idea behind this move, this pawn now controls d5, stopping knight d5 ideas. That is very important, as if black goes, for example, knight d5 in the near future, that could cut off the rook on d6. However, the problem with this move, e4, is the pawn could be a little bit more weak, as the further it advances, the closer it gets to the black camp. All right, now here, Gukesh, queen to a6 is the move. Very interesting, potentially setting up ideas like, I don't know, queen b5, maybe knight to d3 in the future. We'll have to wait and see. Now here, once again, Vladimir, the strongest move is just knight d4, applying pressure on that weak pawn on c6. As they say, you must put pressure on the weaknesses in your opponent's camp. I'm not sure if they say that, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So, knight d4, pressuring c6. The weakness in the opponent's camp is likely the right idea here, but instead, he plays a very strange move. I mean, this move is just really weird. He goes king to f2. Vladimir, what is the idea behind this? I mean, you're exposing your king, you're walking into knight to d3 ideas, you're walking into future rook b2 ideas, and what do you accomplish by playing king to f2? Honestly, I really don't understand this move. If you know why Vladimir played this move, like, comment down below. I'm very curious what you guys think, because I'm analyzing with Stockfish here, and even with Stockfish, even with, you know, my, I don't know, 2000 rated online chess brain, I can't figure this one out. So king f2 played in the game, and Gukesh, he just goes h6. He says, no problem, I'm giving my own king some loft on the h7 square, and beyond that, I'm stopping knight g5 ideas if you were thinking about that. So overall, I think h6 makes a lot more sense than king to f2, but maybe you disagree. Let me know in the comments below, and let's keep going here. All right, now, Vladimir, rook c3, the rook lift on the third rank. I always love a good rook lift, excuse me. And now Gukesh, a4. The only thing I love more than a rook lift is the alpha 0 pawn marching down the board on the queen side. So a4, gaining space, very interesting choice. Now we have rook d4, sliding the rook back, and now we are pressuring that knight on b4. Very importantly, with the pawn no longer on a5, back here, the pawn was on a5, defending the knight, but now one move forward, a4, and then rook d4, one more move for both players, and that knight is undefended, and therefore Gukesh will have to do something about it. So in the game, queen b5 chosen by the world champion. Now we have rook c to c4. Vladimir piling up more and more pressure on that very weak knight. And now we have knight to a6, retreating the knight, pressuring c5, and setting up the threat of queen b2 check, forcing the queens off the board, and again, pressuring the very vulnerable king that makes literally zero sense on the f2 square. Again, why did Vladimir go king f2 earlier in the game? Again, let me know if you know why, because I have zero clue. This move just keeps coming back to haunt him. All right, now, king g3. My goodness. All right, that was the idea. He wants to bring the king into the attack. I don't understand that, but let's keep going. Rook fd8, sliding the rook over. That move makes a little more sense to me. Now we have rook takes a4. Winning the free pawn on a4 is Vladimir, but not to fear. Here Gukesh has everything under control. We have rook takes d4, then knight takes, then queen takes c5, winning that free pawn on the c5 square. Then queen takes, and knight takes c6. Here, Vladimir's officially up a single pawn in the endgame, but will it be enough? Let's see. Rook b6 pressures the knight. Now we have knight e7 hits the king. King to f8 pressures the knight. Now we have rook to c4. Instead of defending the knight, we had the counterattack on the other knight. Now, knight takes e4 wins that free pawn, giving up the knight for the pawn. The point being, after you take that knight, you win back the knight on e7. So, rook takes, king takes, and now finally, we have an endgame between Vladimir Fedoseev and Gukesh D, where both sides have the rook and 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. 4 pawns for both sides, and overall, this endgame should be a draw, but let's see what both players can make of this. Of course, the passed pawn on a2 does give white some winning chances, but Gukesh, he should be able to stop it. So, rook g4, pressuring the weak pawn on g7. Black goes g6, defending, a solid move. Now, rook e4, defending e5 in advance. Now we have rook to b1. The rook belongs behind the passed pawn. That is a saying, and Gukesh does know it. Very solid. Now, h4, king f8, king f3, king to e7, and in this position right here, both Vladimir Fedoseev and Gukesh D do agree to a draw, and it is a very well-deserved draw as there's virtually zero winning chances if both sides do play correctly. It is dead even, so I can certainly appreciate the decision to make a draw right here between these two players. Wow, what a game between Vladimir Fedoseev and Gukesh D in round number 2 of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament, and what a second game by Gukesh as the new world champion. Gukesh playing very aggressive in this game. Let's go back to the opening. Again, after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, heading for the Vienna variation with d takes c4, and then after e4, b5, a very interesting line. You simply don't see this line very often at the highest level, as white tends to get a slightly larger than usual opening advantage, or the advantage out of the opening phase of the game. So very combative choice by Gukesh. He's showing that he is playing for a win as white and black, which is very, very impressive. I mean, all of the Indian guys do that these days. They're just animals. Like, the Indian players play fundamentally different chess than like the players of any other country, like Gukesh, but especially Pragnanda and Erigaisi. I mean, those guys are like madmen at the chessboard. I digress. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button and comment down below. Elucidate me on why king to f2 was a good move by Vladimir. I mean, or actually king g1 to f2 by Vladimir. That move really confused me. And comment down below what you thought of Gukesh, his weird opening, and his play throughout this game. I thought this game was very, very exciting. I mean, it's great to see the world champion play such combative, exciting chess. So comment down below what you thought. Smash that like button. Subscribe to my channel. And if you want to see more amazing chess by Gukesh, check out his round number 1 game in the 2025 Tata Steel Tournament right here. I covered that one yesterday. That game is a beauty. Check it out. And I'll see you in the next video.